Hey, what is going on, everyone? This is the Reside, and welcome to another video where I'm documenting or telling you about my experiences as a visually impaired person in different educational institutes and in different cities. And this one is going to be the next in line. Sorry, it's been a while, but life happens. This is from the University of Bradford. This is from September 2012 to 2013. Okay. Now, I had some connections at the university, or I had a connection. Yeah, a connection. That's correct. I had a connection. Sorry about that. In the University of Bradford, because I used to play blind cricket for Yorkshire. One of our coaches was actually a professor at the University of Bradford. And I understand he's actually retired now, but yes. So I actually met him and we spoke about my prospects about, pursuing a master's because unfortunately given the circumstances and the challenges and whatnot, wasn't that practical for me to continue at the University of Leeds. But the University of Bradford, they said, yeah, sure, we'll take you in. So it's moving to another city, and it wasn't as if I was fully unfamiliar with the city, but I was unfamiliar with the city. Because I used to mostly live around Leeds. My interactions with Bradford were to the interchange train station and the Bradford Foster Square train station. As in, I knew where the train stations were. I knew that you could get to them from the Leeds train station. And I somewhat knew the layout of the Bradford Foster Square Bradford interchange train station. And you had the line of cabs outside as well, the black and white cabs. I knew that much. But once I got into University of Bradford, I thought, I should actually start thinking about this. I should actually start, creating that conceptual map again of a city. Because a city usually doesn't change, usually, because some cities do. Okay, and they seem to be a bit of trouble now, but yeah, some cities do like to change every now and then, ever so often. But generally cities don't change, and the concept map that you create in your head seems to be a bit more reliable. For instance, I knew that the main building of my university, the Richmond building, was on Great Horton Road. And you go down the road, down the slope, you're going to come across some restaurants, and they had a saying about the food culture. Bradford had a food culture. It was a foodie city. Okay, if you want to get sick, or if you want to get fat, or if you want to gain weight, just go live in Bradford or something like that. Because, oh my God, the amount of restaurants and the different cuisines, believe me, if you want I wouldn't say an authentic taste, because of for the actual authentic, you'll have to go to the countries of origins themselves. But if you want close to an authentic taste of South Asian cuisine outside of South Asia, and perhaps even the Middle East, no, actually some of it is actually in par, or maybe even better than the Middle East. But yeah, okay, outside of South Asia or Middle East, or let's say the Western countries. Okay, just to understand how even the subtleties are in terms of regions of South Asia. Okay, and a certain dish produced by an Indian chef versus a Pakistani chef versus a Bangladeshi chef versus an Afghani chef, there are differences. And to experience those differences properly, I recommend you go to Bradford. Let me give you another example. This is a pretty standard dish, butter chicken. Okay. It is not until I went to Bradford that I started realizing that they actually put cashews in their butter chicken. And it actually makes it very good. Some other places put some other things, but like I said, like there's one or two restaurants that actually put cashews in them. So in terms of food, it's one of the most diverse places. Like I believe you're not gonna get too many options outside of South Asian food. You're gonna get a decent amount of Chinese food because oh my god, like they're buffets, man. The Chinese buffets. You're gonna have those. I believe there's a place that used to do parmesans and whatnot. So, bit more on the European side of things. But yeah. So down the road, you're gonna find down from Great Horton, from the Great Horton Road, from the Richmond Building, because it's on a slope. So if you're going to the University of Bradford, you're going up the slope from the Bradford interchange. Okay, go down the slope. You're gonna find a slew of restaurants, and you're gonna find the Alhambra Theater. Unfortunately, like the last I checked, not many people visited. And then you have the Sentinel Square, just a little more down the road and towards one side of it and whatnot. So it's a conceptual map that still somewhat sticks. You have Kirkgate Mall and whatnot. Okay. So the University of Bradford, they were still like expanding in certain ways, and they had somewhat like the University of Leeds and somewhat unlike the University of Leeds. They had student accommodations all around the periphery of the university, and some of them to a bit of a distance as well from the university. And I had a look at a good amount of them. Looking back, the one word that comes to mind, looking at some of these houses, I don't know how this is possible. Okay, mini Khrushchevka. It's if you know what a Khrushchevka apartment is, it's the crammed in type of apartments made by Nikita Khrushchev, to solve the housing problems. So imagine those rooms, but made smaller to fit one person. Yeah, those were the types of, the sizes of the rooms. Obviously, the ones that were a bit more accustomed to disabled people, they were a bit bigger because, they actually designed those with the with the intention of allowing people with wheelchairs to access it and like having at least enough room to squeeze through the different part. Believe me, at one point it feels like orifices of the room, but yeah, squeeze through to different parts of the room, at least even sideways. Okay. So, storage space was somewhat neatly done, let's say um, the bed boxes. I think it's the one you have, like, behind me over there. Like the bed boxes, some of them had, like, hidden, not hidden. Some of them had, like, large drawers and compartments in them. So yeah, that wasn't an issue. We had communal kitchens and whatnot. Where I ended up staying is student accommodation. I believe it's called the Green. And like I said, I'm mentioning these names because these are, I don't think these are, like, secret names or whatnot, or names of people or whatnot. So these are, like, names of, well-known places, relatively well-known places and institutions, and domiciles within those institutions. So yeah, the Green had a concept that it will be as sustainable as possible, and I believe it actually won a few awards for being sustainable. Because let's say, for example, right, the water in the toilets, it generally comes from or it generally is drained into, there's like a big circular pond in the middle, and I got there when it first started. Like when they just cut the red tape and whatnot, they just opened it up. So given that I was legally blind, so I was disabled, they gave me the disabled room. And actually, like, during my summer, because I had to stay one summer there at the University of Bradford, and generally what these universities like to do is, like, during the summertime when all the students leave, they still have to make money, like, because they can't have essentially an abandoned university. They can't have that, like, with just few summer students and the rest of the university is abandoned. So they end up using a lot of their facilities for conferences. So they turn a lot of those rooms into like, let's say conference attendees residences. But they did not like, they were kind enough to accommodate me to stay where I was. So that was good. Okay. What else? I'm sorry, like I said, I'm doing all this on the fly. Now the Green itself, you had different types of houses. You have townhouses and you have your own private rooms. The private rooms were a bit more expensive because you get your own bathroom and whatnot, and the rooms are a little bigger. But the townhouses, it also had an added advantage, and they somewhat encouraged it, but not with, like, just like, giving you a pep talk, if you will, like giving you 2 thumbs up, like, yeah, go ahead and do it. Okay. They had this idea about allowing you to farm your own food. Like, as long as that food is not an illegal substance like cannabis or opium or none of those nasty stuff. As long as it's like, like potatoes, tomatoes and whatnot, just, your average food. I believe, like, some of the houses, they allowed you to farm your own food if you like. So, which I thought was actually a pretty neat concept. It's like a bit of a hobby. So, and it's a productive hobby. Even hobbies can be productive and destructive. So, I thought that was really neat. And the University of Bradford was also expanding. I mean, behind the Green, or actually next to the Green, you had these hotel-style houses, or hotel-style accommodations where the room came with a television and like TV channels and whatnot. I'm like, that's a hotel. Okay. What else did you have? Yeah. You also had I wouldn't say duplex apartments. I'd say rooms with lofts. Like the bed was in a loft area, and this is and these were, I think, the absolute top of the line. Like you even had your own kitchen. Okay. Um, Laundry was still uh, performed using a centralized, somewhat of a centralized system. It's called, I believe, it's called circuit laundry. Like when it was back in the day, it was called circuit laundry. Um, and yes, you had to pay for them. And yeah, there were a lot of um, okay, yeah, this video is already not in like, and I'm gonna just designate it as not meant for children, anyways, because I like interacting with people in the comment section, and like this is kind of one thing. Think they're like taking the easy way out on this. The like just because if a video is meant for children, it doesn't mean that the creator of the video cannot interact with their audience in the comment section. Like there's no reason it should not be allowed. But anyways, you had a lot of hookah lounges around. Some of them, like they're still open. Some of them closed down. But yeah, you had an abundance of them. And let me tell you something. Okay, you know what? I'll make a separate video about that. Okay. Okay. So that goes in accommodation. Any negative points? Well, I'll say, first of all, the room wasn't as big as the one in my previous university, so I guess that's one. Another one is that, okay, you know that pond in the middle? Like where, like, that was linked to all the toilets and the sinks in the bathrooms? Yeah, that pond changed color into something bad pretty quickly. Because it was a stagnant body of water. I'm like, you kind of expected that to happen. Hopefully they fixed it. But still, like, that was like in terms of small sacrifice, I mean, that was alright. It's not like, at least not to my knowledge, it's not like we had a serious bug infestation or something. Because it's not something that I've come across. So we were still like, relatively like, sensible and hygienic about it. And besides, like, especially in the winters, this is one thing, the weather does the pest controlling for a lot of people. Okay. Another and by the way, the green, let me tell you something. Like if you're ever going to visit, like live in the University of Bradford, I strongly recommend you consider living in the green. Because the green is actually designed very well, and it's very picturesque actually, and also yes, that part of Bradford are a lot of it is are on slopes, but they actually made pretty much all of it wheelchair accessible. So you're gonna find wheelchair ramps pretty much everywhere that that like a person on a wheelchair would need to use. So that is another thing I found pretty sweet about it, and the lighting was maybe it could have been better, but it was still workable for me, because this pertains to people with low vision, and which are actually majority of the distance visually impaired people, like people who have a little bit of vision to work with. So The fact that they have some lights, and given the English weather, those lights could be a lifesaver in terms of navigation. So that was good. But another bad point, if you will, like, and this is no fault of University of Bradford of their own, is when it starts to ice over. When it starts to ice over, anyone who's lived in a condition in countries that have snow and that forms ice on their pavements and the roads know that it is one of the most difficult things to do. Walking uphill on a road filled, like on a pavement filled with ice, on a relatively smooth pavement filled with ice, because these are newly paved. Okay, like when I went, you could tell, like, are they using the same stuff, the same, like, rough material that they used to pave the general streets, the general pavement with, or are they going to use some new material? Oh no, these are new material stuff that they're, that they were using. Okay, now that's done with accommodation. In terms of food, I would strongly recommend, like, because I personally tried the food at the University of Bradford, and I thought, like, there are better options right in the periphery. Like, there used to be a Subway, there used to be some, like, local burger places and whatnot. There used to be a Sainsbury's. Why do I say used to be? Because it's been more than 6 years since I've been back to the UK. Since I've been to the UK. So it's actually going to be almost 7 years. So a lot of things can change, in those 7 years. So you have a lot of food options in your vicinity if you don't like the food provided to you, but, like, available to you for purchase from the University of Bradford. Okay, so the food is something you can take care of. And given that, like, you have a lot of, like, tasty options, it's easier to understand why someone would actually go to the university, other places other than eating from the, the stalls and whatnot from the University of Bradford. And it's not like the food available at the University of Bradford was bad. It's like okay, some of them were not that good, but the other complaint I had was that the lines were very big. Like, by the time I get my food, like, I have maybe 2 minutes to eat it before I have to leave for class. I'm like, do I really want to stuff a, like, 8-inch sandwich in my mouth and eat it on the way to class? Like, no. And, look stupid doing that? No. Okay. In terms of, okay, and yeah, most of the facility in the university, around the University of Bradford, was also accessible. And, like, when I mean accessible, I mean, like, wheelchair accessible. They made sure of, at least of this, like, as much as they could. However, all of it seemed at a smaller scale. Okay. The gym, yes, you had a gym. The gym, you had separate areas. I mean, these areas are a bit too far apart for my liking. And like I said, everything was, like, because I came from a larger university, everything was much more toned down. You even had a swimming pool, but you had no sauna or steam room. But yeah, you had a gym with proper trainers, and the trainers, for the most part, were very helpful to me. Okay, barring, like, 1 or 2 management people later on, which were they let's just say they kind of got under my skin, and I was like, you know what? I should take these guys to court. But then again, I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna stick around for maybe 2, maybe 3 more weeks. I can do without, like, you know, dealing with these people, these annoying people. Okay, so that was there. The library, yeah, we had a, like, you know, somewhat of a library, if you will. Okay, and the library, I personally found it, you know, to be, I would say accessible, friendly, but I would say not, like, you know, they needed a bit more guidance, if you will, in terms of how to be more practical with their uh, services that they provide to people with, with low vision and with, like, you know, the disabilities and whatnot. Like, you sort of feel like they wanted to help you, but they didn't know exactly how. Okay, so this finally brings me to the education side of things. And yes, I did a master's in biomedical sciences. And yes, for the most part, I faced the same amount of troubles as well. Okay, let me give you an example. One thing about the University of Bradford, we have a pretty good cancer therapeutics department. Okay, um, we had to perform a hemocytometry. Like, you had to count red blood cells using a hemocytometer. Uh, I just winged it. I looked through. I'm like, I can't count the red blood cells. So apart from that one experiment, I don't recall there being other, I would say, prominent lab experiments. But yes, yeah, I do remember being to the lab multiple times. But that was the one experience that stood out for me. The other times the other times the people just listen. A person in the front of the lab conducted an experiment. I had a lab assistant who took down notes and basically typed up the notes later in the day and emailed it to me. In hindsight, I'm realizing what a waste of time that was. It was an absolute waste of time. I mean, it's better than nothing, but when you're paying so much money, you know, to get a master's degree in biomedical sciences, you'd want a bit more than better than nothing. Okay? Like I said, I'm not blaming anyone for this. It's like specifically for this. It's just a deficiency in the entire system. Like, what else could they do? So, like I said, it was like, essentially what it was, what is equated to be, is that I am basically listening to the description of an experiment performed by someone with maybe a few glimpses of what an idea of what's being done on one time of day, and I'm getting a text version of the description of the experiment, what was done earlier in the day, sometime later in the day. So I'm receiving no, you know what? I'm not gonna give you this. I'm not gonna give this for free. Sorry. This you'll all find out in my research, and this is actually the crux of my research. Why? What? Like, you know, because I finally discovered, after a lot of researching, I finally discovered why the current system that is put in place is so inefficient. Okay, but yeah, so figure out what you can from from the little example I've given you. Okay, so long behold, it was inefficient. But, oh my God, the University of Bradford tried. They really, really tried. And this is why, like, I'm still somewhat in touch with the alumni and development team from the University of Bradford. I still called up my professors. I wrote an extra, like, piece about why you should encourage people with disabilities to study, to study science subjects. For the University of Bradford, or I don't know if it got published or not, but I did submit it to someone who did request it. Okay, and the amount of support eventually came out during my master's project phase, because in the University of Bradford, the very last semester, because this was a 4-semester project. No, sorry, what am I saying? This was a 3-semester. Yeah, this is UK. Sorry, this is a 3-semester course. Fall, spring, and summer. And believe me, some people have this notion that just because summer is a vacation time, that if you take classes in the summer, it's going to be vacation mode classes. Oh my God, that is not the case. The summer classes are more intense than the fall classes or the spring classes. Believe me. Okay. Because for our courses, in our summer summer semesters, we had to do something called a wet project. That we had to devise an experiment, an investigation we'll conduct in the lab, okay, apply for resources within a budget that we are provided, and once we acquire those resources, we will start the experiment and write up the report of the, do the findings and write up the report of the findings. Essentially, it's a research. Now, this was impossible for me. Like, given that time, what was known. Because most of it relied upon the observations the student makes. If I can't make that observation, I will be relying on other people to make those observations. And my professor is not going to be there every single day while I walk into the lab and tell him what to do, and then he does the experiment for me. I just act as a verbal instruction manual. That's not how it's done. So and this is my first real exposure to virtual experimentation. My first real exposure to it. Okay, we found, like, my professor, he was very kind enough to find some software. Like, these were the absolute bare bones in terms of simplicity. These were just graphics and graphs. And, like, we press different buttons, so simulating adding different drugs of different concentrations, and see what happens. So it's like somewhat like a calculator. Okay. Still, it introduced me to the realm of VR experimentation. And once I looked at that, okay, like, it wasn't that complicated. I'm like, wait a minute. This was developed in 1995. Where was this when I was doing my O-levels and my A-levels? I could have done a lot more had I had something like this, that I can experiment with this and I can write up different reports. I can say that, okay, this amount of drugs sends the animal into a stage of stasis, but it doesn't kill the animal. But this amount of drugs ends up actually killing the animal. Virtual animal. Okay? Don't cry about it. Virtual animal. Okay. And like, etc., 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 etc. So I ended up working with 2 simulations, and my budget was actually used to purchase my first copy of ZoomText. Because that is something, because I needed a magnifier and a reader, because up until that point, I was only using Windows Magnifier. And if you know anything about the differences between something like ZoomText and Windows Magnifier, you know that there is ZoomText does the zooming, especially when it comes to reading text, does the zooming much better. But this is just what I found out. At least on my current computer, there is a compromise in terms of frame rate. There will be a drop in frame rate. Windows Magnifier, if you don't believe me, if you have ZoomText, open ZoomText right now, magnify it to your screen, like let's say 10, 8x, 10x, 12x, move around the screen, move your mouse around the screen, then do the same thing with the same magnification for Windows Magnifier. You will see the Windows Magnifier moves a lot smoother, but the magnification is not that clear. ZoomText moves a little slower, but the magnification is much clearer. But this is more practical for people with low vision. Because people with low vision, once they use their magnifier, they generally don't use it to see moving pictures or moving videos. They use it to pan across the screen, to read text. So it's more practical for people with low vision. So up until that point, I was using a Windows magnifier, and man, let me tell you, it was a different type of hell that I went through. Absolute different type of hell. Finally, after I got Windows, ZoomText, and I learned, I was introduced to ZoomText before, but I was a little skeptical about trying new technology because I didn't want to have something that I did not know how to use. So once I said there's no other way, let's just try ZoomText. I learned how to use the magnifier, the reader, and the reading zones, and the speaker tool. Absolute lifesaver. That is what helped me get my master's degree. It was still crawling past the finish line, because what was demanded of me was really, really hectic, because I had to read over I had read a substantial amount of research articles, and at one point I fell short. I'm like, I can't do this. A normal person would barely cross that line by in the time allocated. For me, I have to acquire okay. For me, I require the extra time. Why do I require the extra time? You'll have to find out through my research. If it ever gets done. So hopefully it will. Fingers crossed, hopefully it will, but hopefully when it gets published, you're gonna find out why do people like us need the extra time. Okay. But it was just not possible for me. My final dissertation ended up being 77 pages long, where on average they're 20, 30 pages long. Mine ended up being 77 pages long. So yeah, I had to run the longer race and then some to crawl past the finish line, for my master's degree. But by God, I did it. And yes, there was another disabled person in my class, but he had a different disability. He did not have a perceptual, I would say, perceptual disability. And yes, while acquiring information, yeah, this one I'll give you for free. Whilst acquiring information, perceptual disabilities are very debilitating. Obviously, cognitive disabilities are also debilitating, but when you don't have a cognitive disability and you have a perceptual disability, and when you know that had you not had the perceptual disability, you could use a lot of your cognitive abilities to learn. It is a different type of torture. Just out of reach. Everything just out of reach. So yeah, the University of Bradford, yeah, they helped me cross that finish line getting my master's. They really tried, and I really respect them for that. People at the Learning Support Center I forgot what exactly it's called. The Disability Center, or where they assist you for learning. They helped me out a lot, like learning the technology, like training me with the technology. And once again, this is one of the biggest points, one of the absolute biggest points why the statistics for education for people with visual impairment in several parts of the countries it's worse than, it's like, once you look at the literacy rate, you will think that this, because a lot of people are talking about certain minority groups and whatnot, and their lack of equity and whatnot. I strongly believe that they have not looked at people with disabilities, such as those with visual impairments, those with autism, etc., etc. Their employment statistics, their educational statistics, like some of them are at the single digit margin, at the single digit level. The one that said that literacy rate for people with visual impairments in the developing world is less than 3%. How can anyone, because once I look at that, I'm like, wait a minute. Why is no one talking about this? This is a bigger problem. Because this shows that the problem is so big that only 3% of the visually impaired community in the developing world can manage an education. Probably can manage an education. They have 97% of them, they have obstacles to basic literacy. And without literacy, life becomes so much more difficult. But anyways, that's good Lord. It needs a lot more focus and a lot more unity, and a lot less people just sitting on their hands and not doing anything. Okay. So that was my time at the University of Bradford. Around September, I moved back to the University of Leeds because my course was officially over, and it was cheaper for me to actually live in Leeds at that point. Yeah, I ended up paying a bit of council tax, but it's not that much. It's just a little bit. And it was only going to be for 4 months anyways. So I still occasionally attended the wrestling school. I played my last cricket match in Leicester, for Yorkshire County. I played my last cricket match in Leicester. I actually spoke to one of our veteran players a few days ago. And yeah, I mean, when I was like, like I really wish I could be back there to, to continue to play cricket, and because I was really, really, really passionate about playing cricket. Because I told one of my friends, this, like, just like everyone else, visually impaired people have aspirations and dreams too, to they idolize sports personalities too, sportsmen and sportswomen. They idolize celebrities and athletes as well, and they want to be like them as well to some degree. In the back of our mind, we know that because we're visually impaired, we cannot be like a Waqar Yunus. We cannot be like a Sachin Tendulkar. We cannot be like an Owen Morgan or a Ben Stokes or an Andrew Flintoff. But this cricket, it at least gives us an opportunity to try and live out those aspirations. And I said that's why, we are paying for it. We are not getting paid to play. We are paying to play because that is how much we love the sport. So yeah, I definitely had the passion to play cricket, but unfortunately, life happens. And so at the end of January, I believe January 27th, 2014, I left the UK, and my visa was good till January 31st. And I remember, once I crossed immigration, there's this two security guards that said, "Can we check your visa, please?" I said, "I'm on my way out." He said, "No, can we still check your visa, please?" I'm like, "Okay." I showed him my visa, and he said that, you only have four more days left on your visa. I said, "Yeah, so what? I bought a single ticket. I'm not coming back. This is the end of my time in the UK. This is the end of my story in the UK. I'm not coming back." And I didn't mean that necessarily in a derogatory fashion. It's just that, on what premise would I come back? I can't get a student visa for a course that I have not registered for. I can't get a visit visa, or it wouldn't make sense for me to get a visit visa. So yeah, that was the end. And thus ends my time in the UK. My overall thoughts. Believe me, a big part of me still wishes that I was back in the UK. But now a bit less so, because from what I'm seeing on how people are not necessarily starting to act, but starting to think and believe, I'm like, you guys are losing your minds. Some of the things you're coming up with, it's historically impractical. What the hell are you talking about? And once I've moved to America, I've realized something about the UK, that generally people in the UK, they're more idealistic than practical. In America, they're more practical than idealistic. And perhaps this is why, the United States have actually made so much progress in so little time. They've become the most powerful nation, on earth. So I mean, I always like to associate it. It's because Americans drank coffee and the Englishmen drank tea, and coffee is more stimulating than tea. So Americans were more driven. But I don't know what it is, but there is a a definite distinction of philosophical approach when it comes to Americans versus the average American versus the average British, at least what I've seen in college institutions. I'm not talking about the British that live here in America. No, the British that live here in America, these are some of the best people in terms of skills, in terms of drive, and in terms of practicality. They're also very, very practical. They will tell you, okay, we want to achieve this. Is this going to work? How do we make this work? Like, practically, we can't just say that, oh, we have to do this to correct all the maladies, all the mistakes of the past. We just have to do this, and hopefully it'll work. I'm like, no, that's what the Soviet Union did. It didn't work. Like, first you build, first you do it, then we'll see. No. Anyways, that was my time at the University of Bradford and concluding my time in the UK. Please do let me know what you thought in the comment section below, and if you have any specific questions that you would like me to answer about my time in the UK or my time in the Middle East, please put it down in the comment section below and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. This is Tanveer Syed signing out. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe, bell notification button.